The world's current plan to slow global warming is the Paris Agreement, signed by more than 170 countries in 2016. Under that deal, Australia pledged to reduce its emissions by 26% from 2005 levels by 2030. Most of Australia's carbon emissions come from 4 areas of our economy: transport, industry, agriculture and electricity. Electricity is the biggest contributor to our emissions, making up about 34%. They're trending down because there's been a decrease in gas and coal-fired power and a boom in renewables.
Within electricity, things are changing relatively fast. We're getting a wave of renewable energy coming in, wind and solar, making up for the closure of the Hazelwood power station and making advantage of the fact that wind and solar power have become really very cheap compared to previous years.
This solar farm in Coleambally in New South Wales can power up to 65,000 homes.
Why is Australia such a good place for renewables?
Well, look at the resources the country is blessed with, like sun, wind, a lot of space, and a need for a cleaner, with a less carbon economy, industry. That's a perfect combination.
When French company Neoen came to Australia in 2012, it saw a land of opportunity.
We looked at the availability of land, resources, the policies for renewable energy, and back then in 2012 that was quite promising. So we decided to start developing solar farms and wind farms, and here we are 6 years later. We are the leading independent renewable energy producer. Australia is huge for us. It's half of our installed capacity globally.
But since then, government support for renewables has waxed and waned. Investors are feeling uncertain.
I think what is needed is a long-term goal for the integration or implementation of renewable energy. A long-term goal is not a burden. A long-term goal is a certainty that there will be more and more cheap, sustainable and reliable electricity injected into the grid. And investors, like consumers, need to understand what is going to happen in their foreseeable future.
This solar farm was built in record time, less than 12 months. But renewable projects are starting to hit hurdles. The first problem is transmission. Projects are struggling to get connected to the electricity grid.
Best locations for renewable energy, both in terms of solar parks and wind parks, are not necessarily where the existing transmission lines are. Right? And so we'll need to build new transmission. And there's complex questions around who pays for that and who decides where these new transmission lines will go.
And you can see again down here in between Sydney North and Sydney East, there's another line out, 959.
Here in the control room of the New South Wales network-operated Transgrid, every megawatt of energy in the system is closely monitored.
And you can see down this end here, Paul, we're sending 212 megawatts into Victoria. So
the grid is rapidly becoming outdated.
The shift towards renewables has happened very quickly. It's been 30 years since we last connected this much new generation to the system, and then it was all coal. Now it's all renewables.
When was the last time you connected a coal-fired power station?
1992.
The other thing that we're just keeping an eye on today is there's some constraints over here that we're managing as well.
The grid is not being upgraded fast enough to accommodate all the new renewable projects that want to connect.
The biggest challenge we're facing at the moment is the number of applications to join the grid exceeds the capacity of the grid to meet those applications, to supply to all of them. So it's a priority question. How do we prioritise who gets to join to the grid?
The next challenge is storage.
And if you want to transition over time to a renewable future for energy, then you cannot do it without stations like this.
The government recently promised more than $1 billion towards this, the Snowy 2 hydro scheme. It's like a big battery. It essentially stores energy for when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine.
What we're talking about here is reliable, renewable energy.
To get the most benefit from Snowy 2, there needs to be more renewables in the system. The Coalition has backed the plan, but Labor's demanding to see the business case before it commits.
The proposal for a very large pumped hydro scheme, Snowy 2 proposal, of course would be a tremendous reassurance for renewable energy to operate efficiently into the future, but not until it's actually built. Right now, Snowy 2 sits there as a potential, and if it's built, it will eat the lunch of many other storage plants. If it's not built, then many other storage plants do need to be built. So we need certainty about what will happen with that state-led investment in Snowy.
Right now, about 2/3 of Australia's power comes from coal. Many of our coal-fired power plants are old and due to close in coming years, like this one in Liddell in New South Wales.
For the coal-fired power stations, we need to ensure that there is orderly exit. If nothing is done and if it's left completely to the market as it is, without any guiding policy framework, then we will get a very messy period that can last decades.